What we know has been building for a very long time on this, okay? With China. And one of the key whistleblowers on this Chinese invasion into Arkansas has been Congressman Rick Crawford, okay? Now, he said this on our program many times, also said it on Talk Business and Politics, and there's a story all the way back in, just to let you know how long this has kind of been churning. Back on July 15th, this headline on Conduit News, Congressman Rick Crawford, Chinese economic development, a quote, Trojan horse. They'll promise you the moon. Nations in Western Africa, as an example, will come here and say, we'll make infrastructure improvement. We'll give you 5G, and you guys will be on the road to economic prosperity, and we're going to create all kinds of jobs. So what they'll do is they'll come in, and maybe in the end, the payoff is they get access to the rare earth minerals. Let's listen to this. This interview is something we need this provides the proper context. Because in this interview back in July that I did with Rick Crawford, you're going to see all of these red flags. And back in July, we didn't know what we know today. Back in July, we didn't know about the governor's law firm taking money from Chinese clients. And so as we listen to Rick Crawford all the way back July of this year on this program, warning us, we now know why ASA ignored all of these red flags. And it's got to be the money and the Chinese clients. Go ahead, Joe. Play this. Again, this is Rick Crawford, July 12th of this year. Listen. Crawford on the line. Rick, how are you this morning?
I am good. I never thought of myself as a special treat, but that's nice.
Well, I mean, words, we say words here. So Rick, I really appreciate you coming on. It's always great to have you. Now, this piece, do we want China to slow down or stop? Talk Business and Politics. It was out last weekend. What can you tell us about it? What was your motivation for writing this?
Well, there's so much talk about China, and we've heard them talk about we want to make investments in this country and that country. We see that they, their goals with things like their Huawei 5G. We don't get the full picture of what China's ambitions are. And so I think people need to be aware of this whole Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically reconstituting the Silk Road. If you think about the historic context of the Silk Road and the trade routes that found their way to China, and China was a significant trade destination going back hundreds of years. Well, they want to reconstitute that Silk Road with the Belt and Road Initiative, and how they do that is they try to make us believe that they're a capitalist economy. They're absolutely not. They are state-owned entities. They're socialists. They're communists, and what they do is they invest in their businesses. They subsidize their businesses, not with a profit motive, but a sustainability motive. That is to say, we want to still be in business when all these other businesses have failed, so they don't have any other options but to do business with us. So that's why they engage in such aggressive intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers as a condition of doing business in China. So we've had American businesses that go over, make the investment in factories and so on to make, we'll say, a widget. Okay, so they've got all the proprietary information at their disposal as a condition of doing business there. Yes, you can come in here, you can avail yourself of our labor market, but we're going to require that you give us your injection molds or whatever proprietary devices or technology you have, and then not before too long, they'll go down the street, open up a factory of their own, and produce exactly the same thing, essentially a counterfeit product, and put that on the market. That's just one example of the kind of aggressive economic behavior they engage in. To say nothing of the fact that as under WTO rules, they're still being considered, given the consideration as a developing economy. when you can spend the billions of dollars that they spend outside of their own economy, for example, funding a military base, a port in Djibouti, Africa, when you can do that, when you can go to other countries and promise them 5G service, and in exchange what you're doing is trying to access the rare earth minerals to help pursue your economic goals, you're not a developing economy. You have arrived. So you need to drop this sham of being a developing economy and start to play in the real world, which means that you have a different set of rules because developed economies like the United States and Europe and others, they don't get that same consideration. I mean, that's just one thing, but then all tied up in this is their march toward military supremacy. What they want to be is not only the supreme economy in the world, but also the supreme military. They are poised to deploy 2 carrier groups by, I believe, 2025. That's never happened before. It's not in their wheelhouse to be an expeditionary force, and certainly not to be able to deploy global capacity, global range carrier groups. But they're on course to do that, and how they're doing that is by exploiting the economy globally. And I'm seeing some good signs around the world from countries that are waking up to this, saying, you know what, this sounds good, but we're just going to pass on this. We think long term maybe we need to align with the United States or other nations that are not trying to take advantage of us. I'll give you an example of one nation that was grossly taken advantage of. They went to Costa Rica. The Chinese went to Costa Rica, and they pressured them to expel their Taiwanese diplomats. And Costa Ricans were like, well, we don't necessarily need to expel the Taiwanese diplomatic corps. They said, well, if you do, we'll build a soccer stadium for you. Well, I guess Costa Rica needed a soccer stadium more than they needed any kind of Taiwanese relationship, and they expelled them. As a result, they got a soccer stadium. It's that kind of belligerent deal-making that is a problem around the world. It's not as though I don't like Chinese people. That's not it at all. I'm not against Chinese people. I'm against the Chinese government and the belligerent stance that they're taking economically and militarily.
Yeah. And I think, and I want to thank you for, first of all, using your official, position, or, using the, the fact is, when a U.S. congressman, speaks, people listen, and this is a big issue, and I'm really glad that you're speaking out against, like you said, the Chinese government, and calling these companies, in some cases, they're Chinese entities, and this idea is that they are communists. We forget that, and there does seem to be, for example, I read Peter Schweitzer's book, and that book talks about how the Chinese can actually get around campaign finance laws or I would even say bribery laws by employing the children of powerful politicians, that's incredible to me.
Well, here's an example. There's a couple of things that they can do legally. Another thing I need to point out is I've been briefed on this by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence about what they're now seeing a need to reach out into communities and make them aware of essentially a business intelligence and supply chain integrity model. And this is all based on 2 things. One of them is the Confucius Institute, which places Chinese students in academic institutions across the country. The other is just the out-and-out theft. I mean, I've been told about people stealing soybeans, for example, out of a grain bin, just taking samples, walking up, taking samples out of stored soybeans, and now what do you think that's about? We had in 2017 we had 5 Chinese nationals in the state of Arkansas doing research with University of Arkansas Extension Service that were indicted on federal charges. So this is not just something that happens, in the national security space, so to speak. This is happening at home in our backyard, where Chinese people, or Chinese government rather, are seeking to place people in positions to exploit, steal, whatever it takes to give them a competitive advantage. This is happening. It's happened at MD Anderson, where they're stealing research taking place down there. It's all of our academic institutions are targets. Not to mention any kind of tech development. You think about the high-tech corridor in the Silicon Valley, for example, vulnerable to exploitation by Chinese nationals that are placed there by the government. This is happening every single day, and they'll promise you the moon. They'll say we're going to make these investments. Let me give you the kind of example of kind of investment that they promise in places like nations in Western Africa, as an example. We'll come in here and we'll make infrastructure improvements. We'll give you a 5G, and you guys will be on the road to economic prosperity. And we're going to give you all kinds of, we're going to create all kinds of jobs. Okay, so what they do is they'll come in and the payoff is they get access to those rare earth minerals that you see countries in Africa have abundance of. And guess who gets rich? Probably that corrupt leader of the nation in question. Then the Chinese come in and they'll feign some sort of a project, but look, they're not creating jobs. They're bringing Chinese people in to fill those jobs. It essentially is a closed loop. So they bring in all the resources necessary. The Chinese people aren't out on the economy making an investment in the Chinese economy or impacting the Chinese economy, the local economy in any measurable way. And so all this is just a sham. What they want is the rare earth minerals, and they make them a deal, and then it turns out to not be such a good deal after all. And so there are nations in South America, for example, that are having this presented. This is our backyard. Central America, we know the Chinese are aggressively engaged in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. It doesn't surprise you that they're involved in Nicaragua, but I told you about Costa Rica. These are our neighbors, for crying out loud. They're very aggressive in Cuba right now, to say nothing of what they do here in the United States. And then their ability to influence through their soft media push, for example. They go to the ag media, of all things, and they place op-eds, and they put stories in publications that talk about how, Trump is failing the American farmer, and these soybean tariffs are punitive, and he doesn't care about farmers and all this other kind of stuff. And that is that's their media influence campaign that they're engaged in. These are not people who are interested in any kind of beneficial relationship, mutually beneficial relationship between us and them. They are all about China and advancing their own economic and military agenda.
Would there be any way? I mean, I know if you're accepting ad dollars, people are going to want to take the ad dollars. But you would think, I mean, if you're participating in a foreign government's ad campaign, I don't know if I'd want any part of that if I was a publisher.
Well, I tell you, I think we're going to have to reevaluate what it means here to be an American. So whether you like Donald Trump or not, I think you have to recognize that what he has done is to sort of start this conversation about, is it okay for us to put America first? And maybe you don't like that idea of us from a global perspective to put America first. But at the very least, we need to put America first here in America. Doesn't that make sense? So to your point, do we really want to take advertising dollars from a country that is seeking to undermine our economy, which ultimately tees up their ability to threaten us militarily? So that's not just around the globe. That's at home. They're doing that here in our home. And we can't turn a blind eye to that. And so when we have all these Chinese companies, or the Chinese government, because there are no Chinese companies, they are state-owned enterprises. They are agents of the Chinese government, for lack of a better term. They come in and they promise economic development. That sounds good, and it particularly sounds good to a region or a district like mine, the Delta region, that really needs a shot in the arm with regard to economic development. So people get all charged up about the idea that, oh, awesome, we're going to have a factory or a plant in a place that really needs an infusion of jobs and economic advancement. And that sounds really good, but I'm going to tell you it's a Trojan horse is what it is. And we need to be very, very careful about welcoming these people, this Chinese government plan to threaten the U.S. economy, not only globally, and try to diminish us in the global community, but to come in and actively engage here in our own country in a way that we're kind of victimized to some degree. I don't like playing the victim, and I'm not going to. I mean, I know what we need to do here, and we need to just sort of, cowboy up on this thing and say, hey, we're not going to have it. If you don't like the way we do business in the global community, that's one thing. But you're not coming into our house and dictate the terms here.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford. He wrote this great op-ed over at Talk Business and Politics last week, and we're going to cut in here. That was Congressman Rick Crawford, July 12th of this year. Now, after all of that evidence, all of that sound, logical reasoning as to why the Chinese government is dangerous and a problem, Governor Asa Hutchinson continued to pursue the deals. Governor Asa Hutchinson got his agency to approve the air permit for the China-Delphia plant. Governor Asa Hutchinson went to China. Governor Asa Hutchinson took his son to China, or he paid his own way. We were asking for a year, why China? Why does the governor continue to pursue these deals with the China? Notice Rick said these are not companies. These are entities disguised as companies. Notice Rick said it's a Trojan horse. They're not here to help us. We're not going to let the Chinese come into our house and dictate to us. We now know that the governor's law firm takes money from the same Chinese entities that he's given your taxpayer money to locate in Arkansas, and now it all makes sense. Now we know why China. Because China is paying the governor's law firm. We now have the answer. Everything is so much more clear than it was. And the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette refuses to report on it. So my question is, just like he said in that interview, where the Chinese government takes and buys ads and writes publications in agricultural media publications that make the president look bad. They're trying to hurt him here at home. Likewise, is China doing anything to keep this story from being run in the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette? Are the Arkansas Economic Development Commission ads in the ad campaign that they run, and they post their ads on Talk Business, they post their ads on Arkansas Business, is that ad revenue having any impact on the silence that you're hearing? Yeah, the silence that you're hearing. Yeah, okay. Okay, Joe. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. Okay. The lack of noise. The lack of, this is a huge story, ladies and gentlemen. Quote, when we have all these Chinese companies or the Chinese government, there are no Chinese companies. They're state-owned enterprises. They're agents of the Chinese government, for lack of a better term. They come in and they promise economic development. That sounds good, and it particularly sounds good to a region or district like mine, the Delta region, that really needs a shot in the arm. So people get all charged up about the idea, oh, awesome, we're going to have a factory or a plant in a place that really needs an infusion of jobs and economic advancement, and that sounds really good, but I'm going to tell you that it's a Trojan horse, and we need to be very, very careful about welcoming these people. The Chinese government plan to threaten the U.S. economy. Congressman Rick Crawford. Asa ignored that and the advice of others, or the public statements of others. And we ask why. We now know why. Because the Chinese state-owned communist enterprises are paying the governor's law firm, where the governor is listed as an attorney as we speak on the website.